Okay, I just want to get my highlighter, not highlighter, sorry. Let me get my laser pointer, that's better. So I want you to think of classes as a blueprint, okay? A blueprint or a template. Now a blueprint is like, think about if you're building a house. If you are building a house, you need to have a plan. And then using that plan, you are now able to build a house. So that plan is considered a blueprint. Now, when we create a class, we are creating a blueprint or a template. Okay? Now, how do we then create this class? The structure of the class is that it contains attributes and behaviors. Attributes are the fields and behaviors are your methods. In Java, we write methods. Methods perform a particular action. And then your attributes are your fields. Those are your properties. Okay? Then in Java, we use an OOP, object-oriented programming paradigm. It's called OOP, right? And this helps us to organize our code, and it helps us with better modularity, reusability, and maintainability. What do all these words mean? Well, modularity means you have everything in modules. Modules are methods. They kept, you get things that are separated. In different modules have different things that perform different functions. So we have these modules, and it's easier when we're looking to change the modules. We're looking at smaller pieces of information compared to looking at one big program. So modularity is important. And then the concept of reusability. I can reuse my code in a different class, right? And that is where that's what object-oriented programming is all about, right? Then objects are instances of a class. So once you create a class, you need to have objects that belong to that class. Okay, and I'll give you examples just now to illustrate that. So remember, we said that a class is a blueprint, and when we're creating these objects, when you create the object, we use the new keyword, right? Like, when you're saying scanner, right? When you're creating scanner KB equals new scanner, right? What are you doing here? You are actually creating an object. So whenever we're creating our class, we use the new keyword. Each object will have its own instant variables and can execute methods defined on the class. What this means is that every object has its own set of properties. Each object has its own set of properties. This means that if I have one object here and I have another object here, these are individual objects with their own set of values. The values do not get mixed up. These values don't get mixed up. They have their own set of values. Classes encapsulate data and behaviors. Now here, this is an important word, encapsulate, right? Think of sometimes we have these little capsules that we take when we are sick, and that capsule contains powders in it that's made up of different ingredients, right? And what does the capsule do? It keeps everything together. It keeps it together. So when we're creating these classes, it encapsulates, it keeps the data and the behaviors together. And this is a better way of organizing whatever you are doing. So that's called encapsulation. Okay? Just to take an example, right? We said that a class is a blueprint. So if we take an example, the human class, right? Let's take a class, a human being, right? So this is a class, human. We know that a class has attributes and it has behaviors, right? So I've got this human class and it's going to have attributes and behaviors. So what attributes is this human class going to have? We know that a human has eyes, nose, ears, hands, legs, and there's so many other things that a human being will have. These are all the different attributes for the human being. These are attributes. But also as a human being, I can walk, I can run, I can jump, I can speak, and there's many other things I can do. These are the behaviors. These are the behaviors of your class. So that's what we were saying, that the class has attributes and they have behaviors. And the methods that we write, those methods are the behaviors. And the attributes are think of them as your properties, right? Think of them as your properties, or like your variables. They store these values for your different properties of that class. Okay? And then as part of the human class, we have objects. So you can have multiple objects. So I've got person 1, that's part of the human class. Person 2 also, and person 3, also the human class. And each person will have its own attributes and behaviors. Each one has its own attributes and behaviors. And these all belong to the human class. And each person, because they have their own set of values, they don't mix. The values are not going to mix. And one object will not impact the other object. Okay? So each object is different, just the way one human being is different from another, right? They both have 2 eyes, and one person's eye does not affect the other person's eye. They are separate, and they encapsulated in that one particular person. And that person has those properties of the eyes, the properties of the nose, and the properties of the ears, which is different from another person who has different colored eyes, different shape ears, a different size nose. So each person, each object is different, but they all belong to the same class. This is your blueprint. And we're going to create a class now, right? We're going to create a class, but before we start creating this class, initially I was wanting to create a user class, but we're going to create this login class. So the class we're going to create is called login. And that class is going to have attributes and it's going to have these behaviors. So these are the behaviors. Okay. Now let's just quickly talk about these and what each of these mean. So we have what we call constructors, right? And constructors are methods. And what these constructors do, right? What the constructors do, so here I'm talking about the constructor. The constructor is used to instantiate the object. The constructor is used to instantiate the object. What does that mean? When you instantiate the object, you are, apart from setting memory in the computer, you also giving values. You are setting. Let's put down. You are setting values. Okay. You are setting values for your object. Okay, so that's what the constructor does. It gives your attributes values. Now, you can give those values in 2 ways. You can fix the values, you can give these attributes fixed values, or you can bring in values through parameters. So, we use parameters, and these are coming in from your main class. It usually comes from your main class, and then it gives the values to your attributes. So that's what the constructor does. The constructor helps to give your attributes a value. Okay? Then you have your getter. Your getter, okay, I think I should just say something here about these attributes before we go into the getter. These attributes, we keep them private. Okay? Now, you may want to ask, we keep them private, yeah. All right. Why do we keep them private? What's the purpose of keeping these attributes private? Why don't we just make them public? Now, we keep these attributes private. Think of it as we want to protect the attributes, right? We want to protect these attributes. So we keep them private. So you're then thinking, so what happens if you keep it public? So this is what happens if you keep it public. So let's think of this as a class, okay? And I've got these public attributes. These attributes are public. Now, if I have another class, and if these are public, this second class has easy access to all of these attributes because they're public. When you keep something as public, it means that other classes can access the values. Now, in some instances, that may be fine, right? If you're not dealing with sensitive information. But when you're dealing with very sensitive information, then it's always good to keep this private. In fact, as best practice, we always want to keep these private. And by keeping it private, now it means that other classes do not have access. Another class cannot access these. But, if you need the value to go out to the other class, how do you send the value out to another class? Right? Because you're creating a class, it's doing something, so you may want to send the value out of that class. So what we do is we then use getters. Getters are methods, okay? So all of these are methods, and these methods are public. And what the method does is the getter returns the attribute. So the private attribute is returned using the getter. Okay? Now it may also happen that sometimes we may want to change the attribute. So we may want, how will I change it now? Because it's private. So another class cannot change it. Well, the one way of changing it now is using what we call a setter. A setter is going to allow you to change a value of your attribute from another class. But if you've been listening very carefully, you're then going to say, but doesn't the constructor do that? Because I said the constructor gives the attributes values. And it changes, it gives it a value. But remember that the constructor is only used when the object is created. The first time when the object is created, the constructor gives the attribute their values. Now, after the attributes have their values, if you want to change the value, you then use the setter to change the values of your attributes. So in one sense, when we write the method for the constructor and we write the method for the setter, there's some similarity. It's not exactly the same, but there is some similarity between these two, right? So we have the constructors, we have the getters, we have the setters, and then we have a toString. The toString method basically returns the attributes. Whatever attributes we have, the toString returns it. Okay, it returns it to your main class. Why would you want to return it to the main class? Now, most often we would use the toString because we want to output, right? So when I want to display something, then I will use the toString method. Now, I can have other methods apart from the constructor, getters, setters, and the toString. These are the main, what I'm discussing now are the main behaviors in a class, but there's nothing stopping me from having other methods that I'm writing for depending on what I want to achieve, what I want to do in the class. So don't think that when you write a class, it will only contain these. You can have other methods as well. Okay, so just as a final recap before we jump into NetBeans and we start creating a class, remember we're going to create a class, we're going to keep it private to protect those attributes. We're going to set up our constructor. There are two constructors we're going to set up. One is default with fixed values, and the other one is parameterized with values that we can send in as parameters. And then we're going to use getters to send out the values from the class. We're sending out those private attributes to another class. The getter allows you to do that. And the setter allows you to change the attribute from another class. So the other class will help you to change the attribute. The toString is used mainly for output purposes because it returns the attributes. Okay, so I think that's enough of theory. Let's try and now go into NetBeans. Right, if I can minimize that. Let's see if I've got NetBeans open. I think I do. Okay, I just want to close some applications. There we are. I've got NetBeans open, right? So I'm now going to create a project. So we're going to go File, New Project, and I'm creating this Java application. I'm going to call this application login, right? So this is going to be my login application that I am creating, and I'm going to leave it in the default NetBeans folder. So let's create this application. Right, so here it is. Here it is. I've got my login project, right? And this is my class, login.java, and I can see that I've got my main, right? Public static void main. This is my main class. But now to create the class that I want, I need to create another class, okay? I'm just going to close some of these other things that I had open. So here's my login. I need to create another class, okay? So I'm going to go here, I'm going to right click, say new, and I'm going to create a Java class. And this is now going to be, what are we going to put in this class, right? We are now going to have our user, right? This is now going to be called the user class, right? So I'm going to click on finish. So if we look very carefully here, I've got two classes. This is my main class, my login, and then there's my user class that I'm now going to be creating. So this is the user class that I create. Okay, so here we go, right? Step one, create the private attributes. So private string. Now normally for users we have a username and we have a password, right? So let's call this username, okay? And let's create another private string password. Okay, so these are my two attributes, one for the username, one for the password. Let's create a third one, private string. Well, let's try and use a number. So I'm going to go private int. I was actually going to use contact, but contact number would have been a string, right? So now I want to use an integer. So for a user, what number would I want? Well, maybe let's use age, right? We want to track the user's age. And the username here we'll use the person's email address, so it's unique. They will set up a password and we'll just track their age. So those are my three private. These are my private attributes, right? So step number one has been set. Set up your private attributes. Okay, you'll be given this. If you're working with a type of application, you'll need to figure out what these are. If you're writing a test, you will be given. They'll tell you what attributes to create. Okay, so the next step is the constructor. Okay, now when I was doing the theory, something I forgot to mention is that with a constructor, it has the same name as the class. So whatever your class is called, the constructor has the same name. So we say public user. There we are, public user, right? So that's my constructor, and this is a default constructor, right? So default means I'm giving it fixed default values. So I'm going to say username equals, and it's a string, so let's put down, we want an email address, right? So the email address I'm going to put is winnie@gmail.com. So that is my username. My password, let's set my password to tiger 108 star, something like that, right? So that's my password. And then the age, let's set an age, and this person is 20 years old. There we are. So that is my constructor. Let's put down a comment. This is my default constructor. Okay, so if you following along and you want to try this out, by all means, you have your computer, listen to what I'm doing and get the explanations and try it out for yourself, right? Remember, I wanted two constructors. You don't have to have two constructors, but I'm choosing to create a second constructor. And here we are overloading. This is called overloading, where we're using two constructors, but this time the difference is I am bringing in string username, okay, and then I'm going to say string s password. These are my parameters, right? And then the age, I'm going to say int, and I want age. So for this age, I'm doing something that's different. Now remember, I said that these are my parameters, okay? These are my attributes. These are my attributes, and these are my parameters. Now if you look here, I've got an S in front. Because it's a string, I decided to put an S in front. So if I look at the first one, there's a difference between my parameter and my attribute. If I look at the second one, I also put an S. So there's a difference between between password, which is my attribute, and my parameter. But look at this. Here, there's no difference between the parameter and the name of my attribute. So the question is, how do we differentiate? How do we differentiate the attribute and the parameter? Okay, it's possible you can keep them the same. There's nothing wrong if you use the same names, right? You can use the same names like that. Okay, so now my parameter value and my attribute have the same name. So if you're doing that, I don't recommend you do that, right? But if you do that, then the way you tell Java that this is the attribute, you tell Java this is the attribute. So we literally use the word this, and now we say username. So here, and then we say username like that. Okay, what it means is this username is referring to the attribute, and username here is referring to the parameter. So that's why we use this, and you generally use the word this when you use the same attribute name and the same parameter. Okay, but if you changed it the way I initially had it, S username, and then you've got S password, and well, if I can change this to I age, because it's an integer, then in that case I don't need to use the word this. I can now just say S username. Let's hope I got my spelling right. S username, like that. Now I don't need to differentiate because these two are different. They are different. So I don't need to use the word this. Okay? So just understand when you use the word this and when you don't, right? If you're choosing to keep them the same, you have to use the word this. Right, then we're going to go password. Let's go a bit faster now. Password equals S password. Okay, and then finally age, which is my attribute, equals I age, which is my parameter. So I've got a default constructor. This is my parameterized constructor, right? So these are two constructors that are already set up. Now I need to set up my, remember, getters and setters, right? A get helps me to send out the value. We send it out using a return method. We return it to another class, right? So here I'm going to go public string because I'm returning get username. Okay, and we simply return the username. That's it. We return the username. Okay. I could do the get and the set for username. Or I could do all my gets and then my sets. Whichever way you want to. So let's go public string. Let me write my other gets. Get password. Okay, and then return password. Let's do my next public int, because I'm returning an integer, get age. Okay, and here return what? Return the attribute, which is the age. I'm done with my getters. Okay, so let's put in a comment here. These are my getters. Okay, now let's do the setters. Okay, in fact, it could be a good idea the minute you write the getter, write the setter, right? Because then you're doing them in pairs. So the setter is not returning a value, So that's going to be a void method. Remember I said it was similar to your constructor. It's changing the value of the attribute. So we need to bring in a value and we change it, right? We bring in a value and we change it. So how do we do this? Public void set user name, and we bring in a value. Notice I'm keeping them different, the username and the attribute, so I don't have to use the word this. So I'm going to say username. Let's start using my IntelliSense so it goes a bit faster, right? And now I'm going to go public void set password, and here again string s password. Okay, and we're going to set password to equal to s password. There we are. One more to go. Public void set what was it? Set age. Right? Now let's bring in the age. That's an integer. Right? I'm keeping it different from the attribute name. So I'm going to say age equals age. There we are. Setters are done. Right? So I'm done. I've written my two constructors. I've got my getters. I've got my setters. The last method that I want to write is a toString. So I'm going to go public string. A toString is returning. So it's public string toString. Right? It's returning nothing to bring in. I don't bring in anything. Right? And you want to return the attributes. So that's what you want to do. You want to return the attributes. So I could do it in one return statement. It will work. All right. But I'm going to build it. I'm going to build it into a string variable that I'm just going to call str, and then I'm going to say str equals. I'm going to put some headings. Right. The username equals, and then let's put down the attribute username, and then I now want to leave a new line, and I want the heading password equals, and I want my attribute, right? So my heading and my attribute is separated using a plus. I want a /n again, and then I want the heading age equals, and let's put down the age, and then we need a semicolon to end that line, and we need to return, and now I return my entire string. Now, as I said, you could have returned at one go. You didn't need the variable str. I could have said return, and I could have had that line. Okay, I built it up, stored it in a string, and I'm returning the string. So this is the toString method that we are going to use. Okay, so we are quite. This is pretty much the main attribute. The way you set up your class. The way you set up your class. Private attributes and all your behaviors. Okay, let's now move to our login. This is now our main class. Okay, this was created for us, so I'm going to take that out. Right, let's drop this bracket so I can match my brackets a lot easier. Right, now I need to create. Remember that we've got this user class. This is our user class, but I'm in the login class. So I need to link. I need to create a link between these two classes. And my link is the object. So I create this object. Right? We're going to create this object. So the name of the class is user. Right? and then I'm going to create object 1 equals new. We use the new keyword, new user, and the object has been created. But keep in mind, when you create the object, the constructor is called. So the minute you create the object, the constructor is called. But which one is called? I've got two constructors, right? So look at the signature. Look at the signature. And let's go to user and let's look at the two signatures that we have. So this is the one signature and this is the second signature. And we have to match the signature when we called it. So I'm calling it using a blank and nothing inside of the brackets. So here, when the constructor is called, the default constructor will be called. Okay? So the best and easiest way to see the values is system.out println, and the best way is now call that object with using the toString, because the toString, you will recall I told you that the purpose of the toString is to return your attributes. So here the constructor gives the attributes these default values. I then call the toString, and the toString now displays the attributes with these headings. These are the headings. Okay? So when I now call the toString, I expect it to now display these values. So let's give it a run. Let's go to my login and let's give this a run and let's see what this does. And let's see whether I get what I'm supposed to get. Now, if I look at my output, which is happening here, you can see that my username is Winnie, my password is Tigger108 star, my age is 20. Okay, so this is working quite nicely. I created an object. The default constructor is called, and here we can see that it displayed the values of the attributes. Now that I've created this, I could, let's play around with this, and now let's say obj1 dot. Let's set the password. Let's set the password to something else, and let's set it to 12345. Now you'll notice that I called the object in a print statement because this was returning a value. It's returning a value, so the value returned is getting output. This is not returning a value. This is a void method. So I simply call it by its name, setPassword. And setPassword wants a parameter, and I'm giving it the parameter which is sent to this user class, right? So that parameter 12345, if I go into the user class and I look for setPassword, it's coming in with 12345, right? There. And what does it do? It assigns it to the password. It assigns it to the password. So what do you think is going to happen now? I'm creating the object. So the attributes have their default, right? The constructor with the default values. But I'm now changing the password. So it's no longer, the password is no longer Tiger. What did I have as my default password? The default password was Tiger, right? So it's no longer going to be Tiger because I reset it. I used the set method and I'm changing it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now when I view my attributes, it's going to tell me winnie@gmail.com. It'll give me this password and the age. I think I set the age to 10. Right? Let's test it and let's see what we come up with. And if you look carefully, there the email still remains at Winnie and the password has changed. And the age, no, the age was not 10, it was 20. Right? So don't think the age changed. The age was 20. I made a mistake when I said I thought it was 10. This has changed. The password is what has changed. Okay? We're almost there. We're almost getting to the end. I just want to do a few more calls, right? So here I've got my object 1 and we changed the password and I then output, right? Before I create an object 2, let me, instead of printing all the values, let's assume I'm only interested in the password. I'm only interested, okay, sorry, not the password. I'm only interested in the username, right? We know that this gives us all the attributes. Now I don't want all the attributes. I only want the username. So I won't call the toString. I won't call the toString. I'll now call the getter. We've got a get user name. So this returns a value. What value does it return? It returns the username. Right? It returns the username. Okay? So it returns a username and that username is going to be displayed. Okay, so let's give this a try and let's see what gets output. Now when I look carefully at my output, I only got the username. There is no password, there is no age. Those things are missing. I'm simply displaying, right? I'm simply displaying the username. So remember, when you call the toString is going to give you all the values. The toString is going to give you all the attributes. But if you want a single value, then call the getter. Just call whichever value you want. Call that getter. Okay? So I'm going to leave this back to my toString. I'm going to leave it back to my toString. Now let's create a second object, obj2 equals new user. Right? Now if I leave this as it is, again, which constructor? Remember, every time you create an object, the constructor gets called. So for the first object, the constructor got called. The second object, the constructor gets called. But which constructor is going to get called? Well, it depends on my signature. Now, that signature is the same, which means the default constructor gets called. But now, I want the parameterized constructor to get called. So I need to give it a username, which is string, a password, string, and the age. I need to give it those values. All right? So when I call this, let's give it values. I could either use variables, right? So I could do something like this, string un for username equals, let's put down Tigger tigger@gmail.com, right? And then I could use UN as my parameter. If I want, I can fix the value and put a string in and say my password is 99887766. And then I'm going to hard code the age, and I'm going to say my age is 35. There we go. So this, now if we look at the signature is a string, UN is a string. It's a second parameter which is also a string because of the quotes, and the third parameter is an integer, it's a number, there's no quotes. So this signature is a string, integer, int, string, int. So do we have that signature that is a string, int? Yes, we do. So because we do, that will be accepted. Now, if I had to put quotes around this, right? I'm changing the signature to now a string, and string. So this is also a string. You'll see immediately now it's starting to complain. Java has picked up that this signature does not correspond with any of the constructor. We've got two constructors. It does not correspond with the constructors, right? So that is why it is complaining, right? It is saying, if you look at the error, it's saying incompatible type string cannot be converted to an int. So it knows that this needs to be an integer, and now it's no longer complaining. So let's go and say system.out.println, and let's now print obj2, which is my second object. If you want to print something specific, use the getter, right? Use the getter to print something specific. If you want to print everything, all the attributes, use the toString. Okay, use the toString. So in this instance, I've got now Tigger 99887766 and 35. That's for my object 2. Let's just system.out.println. Let's put a heading object 2. Okay, and then I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to put in a heading. Well, let's put the heading just before we output here, and this is going to be object 1. So when it does the output, okay, when it does the output here, it'll have the heading object 1 and then the toString, all the values. It'll have the object 2, and then it prints the toString with all the values. Okay, I've got an error here. That's because I'm working with object 2. It's not just object. Right, let's give this a run. And when we give it a run, if you look very carefully, object 1, there we are. Right, that's the default. Remember, there was a set. Therefore the password changed. Look at object 2. Object 2 are the values that I gave it. Okay, and then before we conclude, maybe let's remove that set. Where is the set password? There's the set password here. So if I take that out and I run it, now you'll see object 1 will have the default password, which is Tiger 108 And then here we've got our second, which is the parameterized constructor that has been called. Apologies for the sound problem that I had at the start of the lesson that set us back a little with the time. But this is a section, when you're writing a test, you'll find it's an easy section that you can really score your marks here. Just understand how to set up your attributes. Understand how to set up your constructors, right? Default constructor, parameterized constructor. Understand how to set up your getters and how to set up your setters. Okay? And then understand how to set up your toString. Okay? I was wanting to do a little bit of string handling so that you can get some practice with string handling as well. But we'll leave that maybe for the next lesson, which I'm hoping to have tomorrow. We can just do some recap of string handling, and maybe in another lesson we'll do some recap on arrays and how arrays work. But I hope this has helped you in terms of how you work with your classes. If you found this interesting, those of you that still managed to stay on, don't forget to hit the like button. And you can just send me a comment as well. I see there is a comment somebody has said, please show us how to make a connection to a database, right, using drivermanager.getConnection. Now, regarding the database, here I'm working with classes. I'm not linking to a database. We can do that in another lesson where I can show you how to link up to a database. Here we were just simply working with classes. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for staying on. I'll catch you again in the next lesson. Keep working hard. Keep practicing. These are not difficult concepts. You will get the knack of it. Till the next one, take care, guys. Bye.